The Tampa Bay Buccaneers got some praise for their draft class, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this live Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. Credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. A mailbag episode to send you into the weekend. But first, I want to start with something that was brought to my attention by long-time everydayer Mad Dog. So Mad Dog sent me a graphic from the NFL on Fox podcast of the NFC South draft grades, where the Buccaneers received an A and all the other teams in the division received a D. Now, I had to hear what happened there. So I found the episode that graphic was referring to, and the grades were from the host of the podcast, Dave Hellman. Now, Dave did a great job going through a lot of these teams where he had the help of longtime friend of the show, Carmen Vitale, breaking down the NFC North. Ralph Vacchiano talked about the NFC East before Greg Allman, the godfather of the Locked On Bucs podcast, joined to talk about the NFC South. And I have to say, first and foremost, the graphic that was put out on socials that Mad Dog passed along to me had a typo. Both the Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints received A's from Hellman, while the Falcons and Panthers received D's. So with that said, Hellman was very complimentary about what the Bucs did, saying, quote, "I actually loved the Buccaneers draft as well. I gave the Tampa Bay Buccaneers an A. I think it's because I love Graham Barton, the first-round pick. Looks like an immediate plus starter, probably at center. But you also look at this. Jalen McMillan, the Washington receiver. I think there's good value there. Getting Bucky Irving as a running partner for Rachaad White. I think Tampa Bay is one of those teams that after re-signing a lot of vets in free agency, I think they added quite a few contributors. This is a team that looks like they got better for the short term immediately." Hellman went on to say, quote, "My only question about the Bucs, they got Chris Braswell, the Alabama edge rusher, in the second round. That seems like a natural replacement for Shaq Barrett. Yaya Diaby had a nice season last year, but for as much as Todd Bowles likes to get pressure and create pressure, is there enough there even with a second rounder in the mix?" End quote. Now, Greg Allman went on to answer that question quite well, basically talking about an edge rush committee, and the Bucs still have plenty of players that they're really high on. They didn't see the field much last season, like Jose Ramirez and Marquise Watts. But overall, I think Hellman did what a lot of people don't do. And I've talked about draft grades on the show. You can't truly grade a draft until you're probably 3, maybe even 4 years into the process, because you're grading a draft based on projections that you had before the draft anyway. So nothing has changed in terms of your view of these prospects, but you have to see how they fit in with the teams before you can truly give them a grade. But what Hellman did was he looked at the draft for what it was, and that's addressing needs with solid players and not worrying about the big splashes or the mega trades or anything like that. He looked at the Bucs roster and their team from last year. He saw what Jason Light and Todd Bowles and the group inside that war room did, and the fact that they did exactly what they needed to do in this draft, and they did it without sacrificing their limited capital in this draft or any capital in a future draft. You have a locked and loaded starter along the offensive line that fell in your lap at 26 as the consensus top interior offensive lineman in the draft. You added an edge rusher that produced with a fraction of the playing time as others because he was behind Will Anderson and he was behind Dallas Turner. You got a ball hawk defensive back from a big-time program that wins championships. You got a playmaking wide receiver to give Baker another weapon. You got a running back to come in and help Rachaad White. This football team in Tampa got better last week. Now, it's about whether or not they can build off of last year's strong finish with these additions and with a really difficult schedule, because let's not kid ourselves, the Falcons and the Saints got better compared to last year. The Falcons more so in free agency than in the draft, but they still got better. The Eagles, the Ravens, the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Broncos, they're all on the schedule and they all got better. So you have the Cowboys. I'm not sure they got better, but they weren't really bad last year either. Washington got better. The Giants still have Daniel Jones, so there's only so much that team can do. The Raiders are now loaded, minus the quarterback position, so they're not going to be a problem, I wouldn't think, next year with Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, but they're going to be a problem in the future. The Chargers still have a ton of talent. The Panthers, they're whatever. But this schedule is brutal for the Buccaneers. It might be really, really tough to win 9 or 10 games next season, but the Bucs certainly have the pieces now to improve off of their finish heading to the divisional round last season. So I really liked the way that Hellman broke down a lot of these drafts. He broke down basically the three divisions with the guests that I mentioned. He talked about his favorite fits, his least favorite fits, his best, his worst, and kind of did a rundown of a lot of the different teams, but really a lot of focus there on the Buccaneers as well as the rest of the NFC South. So if you have the opportunity to go check that out, the NFL on Fox podcast. Again, Carmen Vitale does a great job talking about the NFC North. Greg Allman, as always, did a great job talking about the NFC South. Going to jump into the chat real quick. We got Daytona Dad in here. He says, James, long time, finally made another live. Been loving the draft coverage, buddy. Well, thank you, Daytona Dad. I appreciate that. We got D13. Whoa, first time live with you, James. Not the first watch. Locked On Bucs is definitely an everyday for me. I appreciate you so much. Insider David in the chat says, super excited about McMillan and Tyke Smith, as am I. We're going to talk more about Jalen McMillan coming up a little bit later. I have no idea why Al Bundy is talking about The Price is Right in the chat. Richard in the chat says, Bundy, if you get a chance to rewatch this morning's episode of The Price is Right, I was a contestant. I swear, Richard, I need details here. Were you legitimately a contestant on The Price is Right? Because if so, that is absolutely wild. We got Paul, aka Florida Dream House. It's been a minute for me and a live show. Appreciate having you here, Paul. You're going to show up on the show a little bit later on, because coming up next, we are diving into the mailbag. That is coming up here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, futures, and much, much more. The Boston Celtics are still the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 130, followed by the defending champion Denver Nuggets at plus 260, then the Minnesota Timberwolves at plus 850 in the race for the greatest trophy in all of sports. The Carolina Hurricanes are the favorites to hoist Lord Stanley's Cup at plus 390, followed by the Florida Panthers and Edmonton Oilers at plus 500 each. I will keep you all updated as soon as they have odds on whether or not Steven Stamkos is going to return to the Tampa Bay Lightning. If he doesn't, we may have a bereavement period. But in the meantime, something that would cheer you up if Stamkos doesn't return is you go win that $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Every day, just make sure you are coming back on Monday. I am going to sit down and watch some Graham Barton games. I don't want to say film. It's hard to say film because you don't get the all 22 the way you do with the NFL stuff. But I'm going to sit down and I'm going to focus on some Duke Blue Devil games, and I'm going to come back with a review of what I see about Graham Barton coming up on Monday's episode. You do not want to miss that. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Going to jump back into the chat real quick. We have an update. Richard in the chat says, James, no lie, with no new OC coming from the Shanahan tree makes me worry a bit. I'm guessing the capital no. So with New Orleans, new offensive coordinator coming from the Shanahan tree makes him worry a bit. Well, you know, the Bucs got an offensive coordinator from the McVay tree, so maybe that kind of cancels each other out. I'm still mystified that Richard was on The Price is Right. I wanted to be on that show since I was a very small child, and I think that would be an absolute blast. But we are jumping into the mailbag, and we are going to start with the insiders before we get to the Twitter questions. Insider Dave asked, with the addition of Graham Barton at center, does our offensive line move into the top 10 in the league? Now, I think he certainly helps. There's no doubt about that, but there's still a big question mark around the left guard position. Now, Jason Light has left the window open for Barton to play left guard and Hainsey to remain at center, at least for the time being. And I think that might actually be the best approach in terms of the ceiling for the offensive line. Otherwise, if you have Bredesen or Opeta who battle it out for the starting job, and then they're struggling at left guard the way we saw Filer or Stinney struggling last year, that puts Graham Barton in an incredibly difficult position to not only having switched from the college to the NFL game, then switching from tackle to center, but then having to try and compensate for a below average guy next to him. That's a lot to put on the shoulders of a rookie offensive lineman. And I go back to Robert Hainsey in 2022. He was good. Not great, but he was good. And we didn't notice the issues nearly as much then as we did last season. And it was because he had guys on either side of him that were struggling. That magnified his own struggles. Now, Malk overall, I thought was pretty good. And you would think that after that rookie year, that year of NFL experience, he's going to be that much better this season. He's going to have a better understanding of what he's up against, a better understanding of what needs to be done. I think the Bucs might legitimately be better off starting Barton at left guard, just for the simple fact that Hainsey has 2 years under his belt with starting center experience. And then on the other side, is Tristan Wirfs, an all-pro left tackle. There isn't going to be much to worry about on that side. At the same time, they drafted Barton to be a center, and that's where they're going to try to put him. Now, I doubt they are stubborn enough to put him at center to the detriment of the team if Bredesen or Opeta don't look like they can actually be serviceable starting left guards. But they're obviously confident enough in Bredesen or Opeta to go out and earn that starting job and execute it, at least as of right now. I just really don't want to see them in a situation where they go all through camp, getting Barton ready at center, developing that chemistry with Baker Mayfield, working on all that, teaching him all of the checks, the signs, and going through all that. And then an injury happened, and all of a sudden he gets moved over to guard and has to learn on the fly. It's not fair to Barton. It's not fair to Baker. It's not fair to Rashad or Chase or Bucky coming out of the backfield that all have to rely on him. So if he's a center in camp, he has to stay a center through the end of the season. You cannot take him and start bouncing him all over the place if or when injuries happen. So, Dave, that's a long-winded way of me saying I don't know. Because that lingering question mark at the left guard position makes it way too difficult to project, Graham Barton's impact on this offensive line, rocketing them into the top 10 in the league when you could still have a very, very weak link in that offensive line. Paul, a.k.a. Florida Dream House, tweeted in, and he said, who is the sleeper breakout Bucs player from both drafted players and undrafted free agents, in your opinion? And I think this is a really good question. Now, I talked a little bit about those UDFAs on yesterday's show and who I thought had a legitimate chance to make the roster. So if you haven't checked out that episode, please go back, check it out. I split it into offense and defense, talked about a couple of the offensive players, a couple of the defensive players that I really thought had a shot at making the 53. But I'm going to start with the drafted players. And honestly, they have three guys. And again, I'm omitting Graham Barton from this. I don't think that's a sleeper candidate by any means. He is going to be an incredibly talented individual on the offensive line. But they have three guys, really, that could break out and explode next year in Tyke Smith, Jalen McMillan, and Bucky Irving. But I'm going to say Jalen McMillan is going to be my breakout player out of this draft class. This kid is really, really good. His route running from a 22-year-old coming out of college is about as elite as it gets. The only route runner that I thought was better when I was watching some of these receivers during the pre-draft process was Brendan Rice. And that's because he had the GOAT teaching him how to run routes. So a little bit of an unfair advantage. But I'm honestly really impressed with McMillan's presence. Yes, he was the number 3 option last season for the Huskies, but watch those games when he was injured compared to games when he was on the field. He makes a big difference. When you have a high IQ player that can be as precise as McMillan can, that knows how to win reps and put himself in the best position possible, that either he's getting the ball or the ball is hitting the turf, that's a playmaker that you want on your team. And with the attention that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are going to garner, McMillan is going to get opportunities. But keep in mind what I was saying a few weeks ago about the Bucs drafting a receiver as a potential Chris Godwin replacement in case he leaves after the season. Because Jalen McMillan is a prototypical made in a lab slot wide receiver for Liam Cohen's offense. And I want you to think about this. Go watch Jalen McMillan working out of the slot at Washington, 6'1", 190. Go watch Cooper Kupp work out of the slot, 6'2", 195. I'm not saying McMillan is going to be Cooper Kupp, so don't go throwing that around. Don't go on Twitter and say, oh, James on Locked On Bucs said that Jalen McMillan is Cooper Kupp. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is you can see why Liam Cohen wanted Jalen McMillan in that offense right now. And you can see the path to him being the new slot guy in 2025 if things with Chris do not get worked out. This is a guy, and again, he can play the outside, he can play the slot. Godwin's going to get the majority of those slot snaps, but Jalen McMillan is, I mean, if Liam Cohn could go on Madden and create his perfect slot receiver to utilize in this offense moving forward, and it's not Chris Godwin, it is 100% Jalen McMillan, and I think he is in for a very, very big year. As for the sleeper undrafted free agent, I'm going to have to get that on the other side along with the final mailbag question. I want to jump into the chat again real quick before we hit that break. Insider David, who asked the question, said, yeah, Bob's 2 years starting at center are in front of Brady and Baker. That's pretty awesome. Then David also said McMillan is the sleeper for him. Al Bundy in the chat says, I would leave Barton at center, good or bad. He has to learn, so just let him stay at center. And Al, I pretty much agree with you. I really, truly do. They drafted him to be a center. It would be best for probably everyone involved if they just put him at center, let him be a center. But I also think that they're still going to do what's best for the team at the end of the day. And if they're watching Opeta, if they're watching Bredesen and going, neither one of these guys is going to be able to hold up as a starting left guard, I think at that point you have 53 players. You have a coaching staff that you have to worry about the best interest of everyone collectively. And I think that's the only way that you make that pivot. But I agree. If you're going to draft Barton to be that center, he needs to be put at center. You get him trained up. You get that chemistry going with Baker Mayfield, because that quarterback center chemistry is one of the most vital duos in all of football. You get all that rolling, and then you just leave it alone. So I'm with you on that. But we are going to get to that sleeper undrafted player in the final mailbag question coming up next here on Locked On Bucs. All right, game off. We gotta pause here and talk about Monopoly Go. And I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together, build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's a ton of stuff to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. You got cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machines. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Wrapping things up here on a live Friday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And all right, Paul, a.k.a. Florida Dreamhouse, let's talk about that sleeper pick out of the undrafted free agents. As I mentioned on yesterday's show, DJ Williams, the running back that the Bucs brought in, is for sure a player to keep your eye on. And I think he might get himself a roster spot and push either Sean Tucker or Patrick Laird off of the roster. But for the sake of this question, my answer is Judge Culpepper. The Bucs gave Culpepper a $25,000 signing bonus, a $75,000 base salary, $100,000 guaranteed to him. So they have a plan for him and likely have a spot in mind already when they gave him that money. That is the definition of a priority undrafted free agent. He's going up against Mike Green, CJ Brewer, Eric Banks for one of those defensive line spots. And there's a really good chance that he wins one of those jobs. After that, there's an even better chance that he does actually end up seeing the field due to more than likely the rotation of everything. But, if there's an injury, if Logan Hall goes down, God forbid, if Kalijah Kancey goes down, he is going to get some action. And that is a guy that the Buccaneers have faith in. He's going to get a shot, and he might be turning some heads. 9 sacks last year with the Toledo Rockets. He is the quintessential defensive lineman. He is nasty. He is mean. He is strong. He's a little bit crazy, but he has an expectation of himself to win every single snap. And if he doesn't, he's going to figure out in a real quick hurry how to win the next snap. I really like him a lot, and it's for far more than just the it's a cool story angle. Judge Culpepper is a good football player, and I think he could do really well in this Todd Bowles defense. So that's my undrafted free agent rookie sleeper for you. Finally, Divis Druid, who I have not seen in the chat. Divis Druid's always in the chat. But Divis Druid asked on Twitter, said, I was not right, but not wrong either. We didn't get Johnny Wilson, but we still got a 6'7" undrafted free agent wide receiver to learn under Mike, meaning Mike Evans. Thoughts? All right. Well, first, Divis, I did think of you when I saw a video of former Carolina Panthers wide receiver Steve Smith breaking down Johnny Wilson, and he was not kind at all about what he saw. But to your question, the wide receiver that Divis is referring to is Zach Mathis out of North Dakota State. So Mathis is 6'7", 205. He's kind of a string bean of a guy. I mean, think about it. Jalen McMillan, 6'1", 200 pounds, and Mathis is 6'7", 205. But he started 13 games last year for the Bisons, led the team with 46 receptions and 6 touchdowns, was second on the team with 665 yards. So, yes, his size is a huge mismatch, and he's going to win every contested catch ball because no one can contest passes that are thrown up to him when they're 8 feet in the air and he can high point it. The thing is, I don't really think that Mathis has a shot at making the roster. As nice of a red zone threat as he could be, he needs to bring something besides his height to minicamp and possibly training camp that makes him stand out. He runs a 4.6 40, which is a little on the slower side. And unless he is able to get in and figure out how to get involved in special teams and make himself a vital piece of the Suicide Squad, I'm not really sure that he's getting on the roster. You figure at most, the Buccaneers are going to carry 6 receivers on the 53-man roster. Now, I'm not saying that he couldn't make the practice squad, but I'm talking about the active roster. You have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, Raheem Jarrett. There's your 6 right there. I think that's pretty much written in Sharpie. I don't see any of the undrafted free agent receivers beating out one of those guys on the roster. If I had to guess, I would say the 6th is Raheem Jarrett. Like, he's on the bottom of the totem pole there. But I think he's so much better than Cephas Johnson or Ryan Miller or Rayleigh Webb or, Mathis, that his job is safe. Unless Mathis or one of the other receivers just goes absolutely nuclear, which is possible, but unlikely. I don't see a path for Mathis to unseat one of those guys. And again, he could do it on special teams, but usually when you're finding these bubble guys that can compete on special teams, they're moving a little faster than a 4.6 40. I don't know if the dude can tackle, and what good is someone on special teams going to be if they can't tackle? So it'll be fun to watch him in camp. We'll see if he gets to training camp. We'll see if he gets to play in any preseason games, and it might be kind of fun to watch him there. But I don't see him making the roster. I don't see him having the opportunity to be able to get in and play with this team come the regular season. Going to Going to jump into the chat one more time. Al Bundy in the chat says, happy early May 4th, everyone. Happy Star Wars Day. Yeah, you guys can see if I can point, my Darth Vader that I got going on over here. And then for you super nerds up here at the top, I have every Thrawn book held up by Yoda. So, yeah, I'm all about May the 4th be with you. Also, shout out Evan Klosky getting married on May the 4th. Richard in the chat says, isn't Chidi Hanatu's kid on the roster as of now too? He is a tryout invite. So a little bit different than Judge Culpepper, whereas they have signed him as an undrafted free agent. Mayan Ahanatu was invited to try out. So he's on the roster, but not really. He has the opportunity to get on the roster. Mike says, is Baker as big of a baby powder guy as Tom? I don't have an answer for you. Next time I talk to Robert Hainsey, I'll ask him. That's really the best that I can do. And we got, Al Bundy. I knew I saw another one in here I wanted to get to. Al Bundy in the chat says, Johnny Wilson doesn't run routes well and tons of dropsies. I don't know why Pewter Report was pushing him so much. Probably a couple of reasons. I think a big part of it's going to be the FSU connection. People love when the Bucs draft players from Florida State, but it was the size is really what it boiled down to. It was the mismatch, the threat that he can provide. If you're utilizing him in a role, I mean, you go back to the 6 wide receivers. Let's say the Bucs don't draft Jalen McMillan and they end up drafting Johnny Wilson a little bit later. So now you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, Raheem Jarrett, Johnny Wilson. Well, now Wilson is kind of a situational player. You have Palmer, Tompkins, and Jarrett kind of rotating that wide receiver 3 role. And you have Wilson essentially as a red zone specialist, because there isn't anybody in the red zone that's going to be able to defend against him as long as he can bring the ball down and secure it. And, that was something that the Bucs kind of needed last year, is they needed an additional red zone threat to help Baker out a little bit. That's why you saw Devin Culp get drafted to kind of help out with the pass catching tight ends. You're going to see an increased role for Payne Durham this year. And obviously that's why they drafted Jalen McMillan, but he's more than just a red zone threat. He can do pretty much anything that you need him to do. So I think that's why a lot of people really liked Johnny Wilson, was because of the threat that he would provide down there inside the 20, inside the 10. I was never super, super high on him. If he had been like the 6th round pick, I'd have been fine. If the Bucs had a 5th rounder and he was sitting there, I think that would have been a good spot for him. But I wasn't crazy high on him. But he definitely has some deficiencies. So once again, Al Bundy, I'm with you, buddy. And then David, last one in the chat, says, by the way, I was getting off the Mason exit yesterday morning on the way to work when I heard you mention Tanner New. Pretty neat. Yeah, Tanner New, shout out to him. I actually work in Mason, and it's really cool to see a hometown kid get a shot with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a tryout invite. But that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. All of you in the live chat, you were crushing it as always. I appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure you're coming back Monday. Going to have plenty of Graham Barton games to talk about. Really excited to get into that with all of you. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up there. And then, of course, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. May the 4th be with you, and we will see you on Monday. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.